Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 10, 9, going live. 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to 10 Seconds to Air. I'm Alita Guillen. In today's world, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Whether it's what we hear on the news or those repetitive stories that keep replaying in our head, it can be hard to calm the mind. Well, today I have two guests who are studying, teaching, and writing about how to quiet the mind and relieve the stress, anxiety, and even depression that creeps into our everyday lives. They have put together an 8-week program to help us all rediscover calm in this chaotic world. They came together by accident, literally. Dr. Danny Penman is an award-winning journalist and a meditation teacher, and the co-author of the international bestseller, Mindfulness, a practical guide to finding peace in a frantic world. Dr. Penman came to the world of mindfulness following a paragliding accident, and you could say it changed his life. It led him to my other guest today, Oxford professor Mark Williams. Mark is an emeritus professor of clinical psychology at the University of Oxford in the UK. He is a fellow of the British Psychological Society, the Academy of Medical Sciences, and the British Academy. He co-founded Mindfulness-based Cognitive Therapy, MBCT, in the 90s and has been treating patients with cognitive therapy for decades. Though he believed in his work, he wasn't sharing the science with the masses until he met up with Danny Penman. Their latest book, Deeper Mindfulness, The New Way to Rediscover Calm in a Chaotic World, is an 8-week guided meditation program. Mark and Danny join me now from across the pond to share their program and talk about what it's been like communicating their once academic findings with now millions of people. Hello to both of you.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, sir. Good to be here.
You two must be very busy.
It is very busy, and you're quite right that it's very difficult to cope with the large things going on in the world. And then if you have things going on in your life that don't seem so large, then you feel guilty for not caring, for caring more about something that went wrong with collecting your garbage than you do about the world situation. And that sort of sense of sort of disorganization or disconnection is really quite painful for people from time to time, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Danny, I'm going to start with you with our first question. What comes to mind when I ask you what goes through your mind 10 seconds to air?
Let me tell you a little story to put these things in context. I used to be a very keen paraglider pilot. It was the absolute center of my life. And if it was a good day for flying, you'd find me somewhere over southern England, just flying around. These are wonderful machines. They pack up into a rucksack. They look very similar to a parachute. You've probably seen them somewhere and wondered what kind of crazy people would go up into the air with something that looks no more than a bag of washing, really. You know, they are just very simple, very beautiful, and really quite dangerous. Which is why I love them so much. One day, I was flying over the edge of the Cotswold Hills in southern England, and my canopy collapsed. You know, I was about 80 feet up in the air, and the canopy completely imploded on itself, and I tumbled towards a hillside. Luckily, I managed to reinflate the canopy, and within a second or so, it collapsed again, and I just spun headlong into the hillside. Now, luckily, I landed on my feet, but unluckily, the lower half of my right leg was driven through the knee and into my thigh. And, you know, to fall from 30, 40 feet, it's only a few seconds, really. So not much actually goes through your mind in those few seconds. There wasn't even time to think a few expletives. All I could think about doing was, what was this the last few seconds of my life? And I thought, well, it's probably not going to kill me, but it's going to hurt an awful lot. And then bang, that's when I hit the hillside. And as I lay there, my first thoughts were, I just could not feel anything at all. I was completely stunned. I couldn't breathe. And I just thought, well, maybe this is it. And I thought, no. And I thought, I'm going to force myself to breathe. I've got to start breathing. And as I tried to do so, I was hit with the most extraordinary pain imaginable. And, that was a great relief, strangely, because it meant I hadn't broken my neck or my back. If I could feel pain, I was still alive, which was really, really reassuring at that moment. And then I still couldn't breathe. So I focused. I remembered a meditation that I'd learned when I was about 16 or 17 years old. And I'd heard that it had been used, simple meditations, for pain relief. And I thought, right, I'm going to give this a try, because I'd used it over the years for dealing with the normal stresses and strains, just a very simple breathing meditation to just calm myself down in stressful situations. So in desperation, I began to focus on my non-existent breath. And then all of a sudden I started to breathe again. My body just regained control. And I then just focused on my breath, and luckily things started to calm down. It gave me enough presence of mind to pick up my cell phone, call for help. The ambulance arrived within about 30 minutes or so, because it was quite an isolated spot. And they took me to hospital. And it turned out that my leg was completely shattered. My knee was in about 5 or 6 pieces on the lower half of my knee. The shin was completely shattered. I was in hospital for a month, and I had this what's known as a Taylor spatial frame fitted to my leg. And this consisted of a series of concentric rings around the outside of my leg. They told me I would have this frame fitted to my leg for 20 to 24 months. And they were giving me enormous quantities of painkillers. And they kept offering me antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, things like that. And I politely declined the antidepressants and Valium, I think it was. I just said, what do you expect? Of course I'm unhappy. Right. Of course I'm anxious. I'll find a way of dealing with it. And I used this very simple breathing meditation and a very simple visualization meditation. I would do these throughout the day, mostly in the evening, especially the visualization ones where I would just imagine, a healing light sweeping gently through my body. And much to my surprise, and much to my surgeon's surprise as well, my body really accelerated its healing processes, and I managed to reduce my painkiller intake by 2/3, and my rate of healing really sped up. And instead of having this on my leg for 20 or 24 months, I had it removed after 5.5 months. And I'm convinced that this is down largely to just being a lot more relaxed, a lot more in control, or feeling in control of the situation. One day, I was just flicking through a magazine, and I came across this very small article. It's 100 words or so. And it was about the work of Mark Williams, a professor at Oxford University in the UK. And he'd written this book that nobody had ever heard of at this point, called The Mindful Way Through Depression. And it was about his work with his colleagues, about how they'd used some simple meditations, turned it into an 8-week program. And they found it was at least as good as medicine or counseling for the worst forms of depression. And it had just been accepted by what's known as the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. And they assess most of the treatments used in our National Health Service. Are they effective? What's the downsides? Blah, blah, blah. And it had just been recommended by them. I just read this tiny article and I got the book, and it was like a revelation, because some of these techniques I'd been using, I found them enormously effective. I started to use the program, and I then thought, my God, the world needs to know about this. And so I contacted Mark Williams, and annoyingly, nobody, I was a journalist at the time, no newspaper was interested. They just thought it was up there with homeopathy and waving crystals around, you know. And it didn't matter what I did, I couldn't convince them. But eventually I did. And eventually I got an article, a very small article in, I think it was the Daily Telegraph newspaper in the UK. And that was it. And I was still determined. I thought, the world needs to know about this. What's going on? So I'd stayed in contact with Mark. We became friends. And then one day I thought, right, this is it. We've got to write a book. We've got to write a book. And I contacted Mark. And it turned out that the moment I'd sent that email, the moment it arrived in his email box, Mark had been at a really important conference about this work. Mark, do you want to take over?
Is that the end? I mean, I think it's a really interesting how you came to this, Danny, through your own experience. And I think that's so much a sort of testimony, because if people come to this because it's a great idea, it just stays an idea. Whereas you came through experience, and I think that's the critical thing. Yeah.
So, Mark, what did you think when Danny contacted you and said, "I witnessed this, I experienced this, I want to write about this"?
Well, when we got in touch, first of all he wanted to write an article about it, and then so we had the usual interview between a journalist and an academic about what an article would look like and what sources would be cited and so on. And then eventually he said, yeah, what about a book? And at that time I wasn't interested, because there were other things in my life to do. And I was settled in Oxford then. My grant was funded by the Wellcome Trust, which is a huge biomedical charity that funds work all over the world. The meeting that Danny referred to, which encouraged me to think again about writing a book, was that the then director of the Wellcome Trust, who held meetings of senior scientists around the UK every year, was really convinced that scientists need to go out to the public and explain their science. Yeah. And at a meeting I was at, there was a guy who was a molecular biologist who funded by the Wellcome Trust, who stood up and say, I haven't got time to go to schools and explain to them. And this director said, well, make time, in a very gruff way. And I thought, okay, this is big. And basically he says, look, politicians are not going to fund science unless the general public want them to fund science. And so your job is to do the science, but then to go and explain it to the public. And this was happening at the same time Danny was in touch. And so we decided, okay, let's go and make what had been a clinical program available to everyone. The clinical program was called Mindfulness-based Cognitive Therapy. As Danny said, it had got into the UK National Health Service. It was being trained. People were being trained abroad in how to do this 8-week program. It had been found to prevent depression. It's since been found to help people when they're depressed as well. But our focus was on preventing depression. And And Danny said, look, the people who read the articles I write in the papers I write for, this will all be too complicated. It needs to be made more accessible, more simple, and offered out beyond the clinic. He said, who would sit on the tube reading a book with depression in the title? And that's a fair point. Even if it says the mindful ways of depression, people are probably not going. There's a bit of a stigma about being depressed, anxious, having a health background. And so, in the end, the book was written, and then the more recent book builds on that work.
So talk a little bit about MBCT and how long you were actually doing it, this 8-week program, before Danny got in touch with you.
The program was developed in the mid-1990s by John Teasdale, Zindel Siegel, and myself. We'd been to see John Kabat-Zinn in the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, who developed something called mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, for people in physical medicine who had chronic pain, whose physicians couldn't do any more for them, for their pain or for their injury. And John Kabat-Zinn had been working from the late 70s in UMass Medical Center in Worcester, Massachusetts. He'd done this really paradoxical thing. I mean, here were people coming with chronic pain to him, and he started teaching them mindfulness, which basically means awareness, how to be aware of their bodies. He actually started pretty much session 1 with a body scan. Now, you might think, well, that's a really crazy thing to do. People are coming with pain, and you're teaching them to become aware of their bodies. But it turned out that his insight was that when people are in pain, there's the sensations from the body, but it gets intermingled and tangled up with thoughts such as, this pain is killing me, I'll never ever enjoy a moment of my life again, I won't ever enjoy my children or grandchildren. And those thoughts, together with all the feelings of frustration, helplessness, anxiety, depression, get so tangled up that you virtually never feel pain without feeling all the rest as well. If you bring awareness to it, they begin to uncouple and they become more workable. And that's precisely the same model that we saw in depression as well. That when in depression you feel sad, it's never just sadness. It's sadness plus, I'm useless, I'm worthless, I'm a failure, I've got no friends. And with feelings of not wanting to go out, of feelings of hopelessness, despair, and body sensations of sluggishness, you don't feel like eating, or you overeat, you don't feel like sleeping, or you oversleep. These get so tangled together that you never, ever just feel sadness when you're depressed, but all this rest as well. And so we said to Kabat-Zinn, John Kabat-Zinn, do you think this would be useful for depression? He thought it was. We developed mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and offered an 8-week program, which started again, like John Kabat-Zinn's work with the body scan, teaching people to become aware now, not just of their bodies, but also of their thoughts, teaching them to decenter, to stand back a little from their thoughts, so they could see the thoughts like I'm failure, I'm stupid, as just like leaves on a stream or clouds in the sky. And that turns out to be really, really helpful for people. They feel a freedom from these toxic thoughts and feelings that they never thought possible. And when we did the research, we found it did prevent depression. We followed people up for 12 months after the 8-week course. It prevented depression. And the work has gone on since then. We've done work showing that the mindfulness is a critical part of that. It's not just people coming to class and enjoying each other's company, though that's important. It's the meditations that help them.
And were you doing the meditation at the time, or is that has that evolved?
That evolved from John Kabat-Zinn work. So we had been up to that time doing what's called cognitive therapy or cognitive behavior therapy, which is a talking therapy. People go out and find evidence for their negative thoughts, and they learn to decenter from their thoughts in that way. Meditation turns out to be a very good way of dealing with thoughts, because when you're not depressed, you don't have many negative thoughts, but you have lots of thoughts. I mean, within a few seconds of sitting there meditating, then you'll have a thought about an email you meant to send, or the milk you meant to buy, or something you plan to do tomorrow, or an argument you had last week. It just comes and comes and comes. And so you get lots of practice at seeing your thoughts coming and going, and seeing whether it's possible to simply sit there watching them come and go and learn this sense of slight detachment or decentering from the thoughts. Then when your thoughts turn negative, it might not be this week, but it might be next month or in 6 months' time. You've got lots of practice in saying to yourself, I am not my thoughts. This is just a thought. It's a mental event. I can sit here and watch it come. Most thoughts don't last very long unless we start trying to problem solve them and get involved with them, brood about them or worry about them. And so if the natural history of a thought is relatively short, if we can leave it alone, but most of us don't leave them alone.
No.
We start thinking about things. Yeah.
We've got to fix the whole world. We have these thoughts and then it goes into the whole world. So when you have these negative thoughts, you're saying that it's the spinning. I call it the spinning, right? You have one thought and then it leads to the next one and the next one. And before you know it, my husband says you're down the rabbit hole and you kind of can't get out. So you're saying that the meditation, explain that. How does the meditation you said decentralizing? Is that the word that you use? Okay, explain that, because I've got some spinning going on here and now I'm meditating. I don't see the connection on how I'm separating myself from those thoughts. I feel like I'm thinking about them even more when I'm meditating.
Well, that's exactly the point. In a sense, meditation, you give yourself very little to do. And so meditation is not about clearing the mind, because the mind will not be cleared very easily. I mean, there are some traditions in meditation that try to specialize in that, but in mindfulness meditation, the idea and the intention is to allow the mind to wander a little, because then you can see where the mind's going. So, and in fact, in the Deeper Mindfulness book that's just come out, we actually suggest that people see mind wandering like you might see equipment in the gymnasium. If you want to get physically fit and you pay for gym membership, you go there and you see a cycle thing and a cross trainer thing and a walking machine or a running machine and a weights you can. So you see you pay for the equipment, right? Now, when you meditate, you're doing a sort of mental fitness training. And what is your equipment? It's your mind wandering. So if you could clear the mind, you'd have nothing to practice on. So what we suggest is that...
Okay, good point. Good point. If you could clear the mind, you'd have nothing to practice on. I like that.
You'd have nothing to practice on. Good. So you could clear the mind, but as soon as you stop meditating, your mind would come rushing back in. So here's the training. You sit there and after a few seconds of focusing on your breath or focusing on your feet to steady yourself, and people do learn to steady themselves pretty well. And in that steadiness, it's actually, just as you said, you see the spinning more clearly, and you might give it a label. There's my spinning mind. You acknowledge that, this is my mind just spinning, and then coming back to the breath, and then it'll go again a few seconds later, and you come back. So the action is the mind spins, you notice it, you label it, spinning mind. And without giving yourself a hard time or judging yourself, you come back. Most of us, we're pretty unkind to the mind. So we suggest you actually thank the mind for trying to help you out here. It's trying to do the best it can. So when it spins, you say, spinning. Thank you, mind. Appreciating the mind, then very slowly, without any rush, coming back to the breath, coming back to the feet, and then it'll go again. So every time you notice your mind spinning, it's an opportunity for cultivating gratitude to the mind and to yourself, and also acknowledging that that's the mind doing its best. And gradually, the mind begins to surrender. It says, okay, I can see what's happening here. And although it'll start to spin, you'll catch it slightly earlier because you're kinder to the mind. You're not trying to suppress it. You're not trying to contract out of it. You're not trying to give it a hard time. And when you don't give it a hard time, something in the mind settles, but not because you've said, I wish I didn't have this horrible spinning mind, but simply because it realizes that something else is going on, and it's possible to have a sense of calm by making space for the mind rather than trying to strangle it out of existence. So it's a feeling of spaciousness that comes, and that sense of spaciousness and gratitude and settled stability of the mind gives rise to insights about, I am not my mind, I am not my thoughts. And that is very liberating.
And how long do you suggest that you sit for?
So in the full clinical MBCT program, most daily sits are about half an hour, 35 minutes. What we did with Frantic World and also with Deeper Mindfulness is offer people 10 minutes. And in this Rater's book, each meditation has a 10-minute version, a 20-minute version, and a half-hour version. So we suggest that people sit for 20 minutes a day, either in one go or 2 times of 10 minutes. And then once a week as a treat to sit for half an hour. And people seem to be able to manage that much more easily and begin to put together their own program from all the downloads that people can do week by week by week over the 8 weeks of the program.
I'm curious to know what the two of you do on a daily basis. What's your practice?
So at the moment, mine changes over time. But Danny, you say, what do you do?
Yeah, at the moment, or for the last couple of weeks, I've been doing what's known as metta or loving kindness meditation, just because I've been a bit hard on myself lately. So it's very much about bringing, kindness towards myself and to those people around me. That's unusual for me. Typically, I will do 20 minutes of just focusing on the breath and the sensations in my body, and then move on to what's known as feeling tone, which we'll come to a little bit later. So I use a hybrid of this very simple breathing and body scan meditations, and then moving into paying attention to the feeling tones. And this is the subject of our most recent book, because we've taken the program in our original one, Mindfulness, Finding Peace in a Frantic World, and kind of deepened the practices and gone further upstream to the moment where the unconscious mind crystallizes into consciousness. So you're gaining kind of a head start on your mind running away with itself. So instead of trying to deal with your mind when it's very turbulent and chaotic, we go a little bit further upstream to just before all those negative thoughts and feelings and emotions appear in the mind. And this is even more liberating than conventional mindfulness.
How do you handle watching, or how do you suggest people handle watching that chaos that is happening in the world? I mean, the title of your book is, The New Way to Rediscover Calm in a Chaotic World.
I think it's a really important point to notice when it's becoming overwhelming and to limit access to it. So the same thing you do, Danny. And I think noticing the, as you said, the sense of how do you deal with the emotion before it actually starts.
Right.
And one of the things that that Danny mentioned is this feeling tone. There's a sense of before the worry and the rumination and the brooding start, there's a sense of the pleasantness or unpleasantness of what you're taking in, and also gauged up against whether you have the resources and the capacity to deal with it now. So you might be willing to listen to the news or even to listen to your own stories, but you haven't got the capacity. We say that even with meditation, that you need to know, are you willing to sit with this? Yes, perhaps, but you may not have the capacity, the resources right now. You might be too tired, too upset, too overwhelmed. So I think holding these two things, how much do I want to take in about what's going on in the outside world? And also, do I have the capacity to listen right now and respond in the way I'd like to respond?
What are feeling tones?
Feeling tones are the very basic sense of pleasantness or unpleasantness that comes with every contact we have with the outside world or with our inner world. So every time we feel a body sensation, when we see a scene, as we look around, even if we look around our room right now, we'd see some objects that might give us a sense of, oh, that's pleasant. So we get a pleasant feeling. Something else we might see, a dirty plate from an unwashed plate that we left there from last week, gives us maybe a sense of unpleasantness. And those are obvious, but virtually every memory that comes to mind, every time we can't sleep, we're either in daydream or we're having unpleasant thoughts. And so the feeling tones just refers to that pleasantness or unpleasantness, or perhaps somewhere in between, neutrality that comes. And they act as a sort of tipping point for what happens next. They bind us into the stories we tell ourselves. When we're trying to solve a problem, when we're tossing and turning in bed at night, for example, we're often going over the same ground again and again as the mind gets into this mode of trying to solve a problem. If we ever could finish solving our problems, we'd start solving the problems of our in-laws or of our children or the children's cousins or whatever. We'd, basically, once we get into problem-solving mode, we try and solve all sorts of things. And we can believe that the reason why we're going on is because we haven't solved them yet. That's partly true. But the other truth is this: we go on trying to solve them because something's happened which is unpleasant. And the mind says, get rid of this unpleasantness. And that binds us to the next moment. So what we experience as a relentless, continuous stream is actually a series of cycles, which is sort of refreshing itself by the sense of incompleteness and unpleasantness from the last cycle.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to slow you down there for a second because I think that's really important. Explain that again. So you're stuck on something. You're thinking of something that you're stuck on, that this is problematic.
Yeah.
Take us from there.
Okay. So let's say, you had an argument with somebody last week. You're rehashing that argument. Okay. And you're going through all the things that they said to you and you said to them. And so that's the content of what's going through your mind. And you believe, I think, that if I could just think about this content for long enough, I'll be able to solve the problem. And so that's why you imagine that this is going on and on and on in your mind. But what if it wasn't that at all? What if it was the memory of that situation was unpleasant? And we don't like unpleasantness.
Okay.
So something in us is trying to get rid of the unpleasantness. What if instead you could say to yourself, this is unpleasant, and it's okay not to like what's unpleasant. It's okay not to like it. What happens then is the next refresh of the cycle just gives up because there's nothing unpleasant to solve anymore. You've acknowledged that it's unpleasant, and that's okay to be unpleasant. And it seems miraculous, but it can just dissolve. I mean, of course, we have a program in which people train to do this for days and days and days at a time. But even if you could imagine that a rumination, a brooding, a worry could just dissolve in an instant with, first of all, acknowledging what's at its base, what's its root. It's a bit like bubbles arising from, an electric kettle when you're boiling, or the bubbles are rising up, but it's the hot plate that's doing the work. What if you could cool the hot plate? Then the bubbles wouldn't rise anymore. And so this is a way of sort of cooling the hot plate of our mind by saying, there's something unpleasant here, and it's okay not to like it. And that's what people experience again and again. And it can feel miraculous, but there's a lot of good psychological science that says this is exactly what should happen. And indeed, in the old tradition, this wisdom tradition in Asia from which these came, they said the same thing.
So what if you do need to fix something, though?
Well, that's absolutely right. So there's no ban on fixing things, right? It's just that most worrying and rumination don't end up fixing things. In fact, the evidence is
they don't. They don't.
No, unfortunately, it's the time when you let go of worrying about it, then the good idea comes to mind.
Okay.
Fair
enough.
So, and there's nothing in this that says that meditation is going to mean that you can't solve your problems. I mean, if you're meditating and you smell you've left a pan on the stove, you don't just try and meditate
right.
through it. You go.
Okay.
Okay. So there's no rule that says I must sit here and meditate for half an hour, no matter what's happening in the world. But much of what comes to mind, or that keeps us awake at night, is just that we've got trapped in this problem-solving mode. And under those circumstances, although we can believe that if we just think about things long enough, then the problem will solve, actually, the evidence suggests that it does.
I agree. I think a lot of people listening would agree that they've been thinking about something for a long time, that they have not solved that problem. I want to get to the 8 weeks. You've picked 8 weeks. Why not 4? Why not 12? Either one of you want to answer that?
Go, Danny.
Well, the simplest answer is that's how long it takes. We teach you a series of meditations.
That's how long it takes to do what?
There is a program of a number of meditations that's necessary to do. It's like a graduated program. The first 2 weeks are very similar to virtually any mindfulness program you could go and do at night school or in a class somewhere, where you're focused on kind of calming the body, getting in touch with your body and your breathing. It's only on week 3 that you start learning the basis of tuning into these feeling tones, which is they appear just as the unconscious mind crystallizes into consciousness, and they color your whole perception of the world and of all the subsequent thoughts and feelings and emotions. So, week 3, you start to learn these basic techniques. And then over the following 4 or 5 weeks, you just, learn to tap into them at a deeper level and to see how they distort your entire perception of the world, color your perception of the world. And then the final week is really letting you loose on the world. I mean, if we could reduce it to 4 weeks or 3 weeks, we would have done so. If it was necessary to do it for 3 months, 4 months, we would have said, I'm sorry, you've got to do this for another month, learning more and more techniques. But no, after 8 weeks, you have all the tools that you need to just take these techniques into the outside world, into the real world, and then just build them into your life. You know, they're not very complicated to do. They are, I think, easier to do than the program in our original book, Mindfulness, Finding Peace in a Frantic World. Some of them are similar, but it's just a new take on them that allows you to discover this deeper layer of awareness, you know, and it's absolutely fundamental to all life, you know, this layer that exists just as you become conscious. You know, even the simplest of creatures need mechanisms to determine things that are, you know, kind of positive or useful, such as nutrients. We call them pleasant. Things that are unpleasant, they need to move away from, such as poisons and toxins and things like that. And neutral, you know, it encourages all life to just sit still and, you know, because everything is fine, you know, and that's a neutral feeling tone. So you have 3 feeling tones: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And it's common to all life. You know, we give them names, but, you know, if bacteria could talk, they would, you know, they would understand what we were talking about. You know, they're built into our awareness, built into our entire existence. And that's what's so wonderful about these techniques.
How do you suggest people begin who are resistant to this? Because a lot of people will say, I don't meditate well. Mindfulness meditation isn't, I don't know. You know, how do you get started?
Just try it and see. And most people will very quickly gain some kind of relief from whatever is troubling them, from whatever distressing states of mind they are in. And equally quickly, when they stop meditating, within a few minutes, they're probably going to be dragged back into their own trouble and turmoil. But there will be that moment, those moments when they were meditating, when they found peace. You know, amidst whatever chaos is going on in their life, they will have found moments of peace. And hopefully at that point, they will think, hold on, I got a relief for a few moments, maybe a few minutes. I'm going to try this again. And then over time, they will realize that they will spend greater periods of time being more level-headed and more in control of their life, and shorter periods of feeling anxious, stressed, and depressed. And, you know, as the days pass into weeks and then months and hopefully years, you know, they will start to have, you know, what you could say is a better life.
Mm-hmm. Would you say from the time that you had that accident and you started meditating and being mindful in that actual moment, would you say you were mindful or you were meditating in that moment when you had the accident?
I would say I was aiming towards being mindful. I was totally aware of what was going on and what a horrible situation it was, and that I needed to get control of the situation. So mindfulness for me, that technique, it was just a tool to allow
get through
me
that.
to get through that. You know, I didn't have any deeper mystical significance at that time. I just wanted to get through those moments.
So, and then you had your injury and your recovery, and you used tools that you had learned in the past, and you were doing that kind of on your own. So now that you're in this formal practice, you have studied, you've come out with the book. How has your life changed now that you sort of know what you're doing, or that you're, you know, more pointed and directed at it? Or were you spot on? And
that's probably a question that's best aimed at my wife. Has Danny become calmer since he's been doing practices?
Have you become calmer?
I think I have. There are longer periods of calm. I'm aware of when distressing moments are about to seize control, so you know I can head them off. I have noticed that, you know, like everybody else, there are times when I get angry or distressed, unhappy, whatever. I think they're shorter. I realize that the energy is building. And I try to divert that energy to more useful purposes, And, I've also just learned straightforward physical techniques. Like, if I'm getting really, really antsy and distressed, whatever, I'll just go for a walk. And I might not have done that before this.
Right. But you have an awareness of it now.
Yeah.
Mark, I think maybe this question is more for you on the science side of it. Is there a specific amount of time that it takes to feel the effects of mindfulness and meditation work?
The jury's still out on that. So we know that the traditional mainstream mindfulness courses like MBSR and MBCT use half an hour a day, at least for 6 out of 7 days. But we also know that most people who come on a course, or many people who come on a course, don't actually do what they're asked to do and do much less. However, in our research, we found that the more days a week that you practice, the better the outcome over the next 12 months in terms of actually reducing the risk of getting depressed again. So it almost goes with every single extra day per week you practice, you get a shift in the risk of getting depressed again. And that happens whether or not you're enthusiastic about it. So you could be pretty skeptical, but if you actually do the work, you get the benefit.
Okay.
So that we do know that. However, recent research shows that, for example, if you do 20 minutes in one stretch or 2 lots of 10 minutes, it doesn't make any difference to well-being or shifts in stress and anxiety. And there's something which is, I think, useful about shorter practices, is that if you actually do them, you do something really important, which is you're making the shift from what you were doing to doing what you're doing now. So if you don't do them because you say, well, I haven't got half an hour, I haven't got 40 minutes, so you just have zero practice for that day, then during that day, you haven't actually at any time made the shift from being in bed or being at work or whatever, and shifted into this other mode in which you're practicing. So I think that shift is one of the most important things. How long you spend there once you've got to your place and you're sitting, I think is another thing. Once you've got to your place, then you'll know how long to sit for. But often we think, oh, I can't do that now, so I haven't got time. But actually, we know that meditation releases time because you're much less likely to try and switch constantly from one task to another during the day. And we know that when you switch, I mean, obviously, sometimes we have to switch from one task to the other, but often we switch needlessly from one thing we do to answer the phone, to answer an email, to answer a message, instead of bunching things in bigger chunks. When we bunch things in bigger chunks, it's less exhausting and we get more done. So we can actually create more time in the day through a more mindful approach to the day. And ultimately, all these courses, 8 weeks or whatever length, are about being mindful in your daily life, not just on the cushion or on the seat.
Right. And do you have a suggestion of morning versus evening? Mentally, are we in a different place? Or I've heard that morning can be difficult for people.
I think everybody needs to explore what works for them. So that's another reason for deciding to do it twice a day, so that you'll have more chance of discovering that for you, it needs to be this time of day. Okay. Some people do it when they come in from work. Some people have chance to do it at lunchtime at their desk. Some people, I find myself, I do it before breakfast because for me, my day runs away with me after, but if I can I get up slightly earlier and go to bed slightly earlier so I don't lose sleep in order to get my practice in before breakfast. That works for me, but I've heard many people, they can't meditate before breakfast, so why try? I think just explore it, be playful about it. Finding a place that you can go to is quite helpful. Having a place you go to, if you've got a corner that you can sit, that's your place to go and sit, that's quite helpful. But even then, play around with it, explore it. There's no hard and fast rule.
Yeah, I'm the opposite to Mark. I find the end of the workday is best for me because I just have lots of energy in the morning, and it just doesn't feel appropriate to, use it on meditation at that moment. But at the end, before I collect my kids from school, I just think it's a really great way of kind of backstopping the work day and then beginning of my home life. It's a way of switching modes.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And also what I find really very, very useful is just moments through the day. Maybe at lunchtime, just walk mindfully around the garden or around our park. If I find my stress levels increasing, at work, as it were, just a few breaths, just closing my eyes, focusing on the breath, 3, 5, 10 breaths. That is tremendously effective at dissolving stress.
I think what Danny said is really important, that actually, if you can make anything you're doing into a mindfulness practice, I mean, some young parents, for example, don't have time to go away because they're looking after their little one, their baby, their toddler, and they demand all their time. So for them, their baby, their toddler, is their mindfulness practice. How they relate to them, whether they really see them, and seeing them, knowing they're seeing them. That's their mindfulness practice for them, rather than going away and sitting and worrying about how my toddler's doing. So I think it's really good to build it into your life, as Danny's saying, and then anything can become your mindfulness practice, because it's about paying attention with awareness and kindness.
Yeah. Anything I didn't ask. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you at all.
I'd say that's what's lovely about the practices in our new book, Deeper Mindfulness, is they're actually a lot simpler. You're going about your daily business and it's just mentally checking in, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, just rather than judging the moment, a value judgment, just acknowledging, unpleasant, pleasant, neutral. Right. And that's one of the most important things you can do. If you follow the program in the new book, just use it as you progress through your day. Yeah. And that's, one of the most powerful techniques you can do.
Right. I'm curious to know, Mark and Danny, how you both feel now that you've sort of come full circle. Mark doing this research and having it go out to the scientific and academic community, and now you two coming together and Danny saying, no, wait a second, we need to get this to the masses. This is good stuff. How are you both feeling now that you're able to see so many people benefiting from the work that you've done?
Well, I find it bewildering because I remember, Mark and I would be writing together, sometimes separately, and I was often thinking, this is really, really important. There's probably only going to be a few thousand people ever going to read it. And I remember getting, I very, very rarely cry. I get upset like that. But I do remember feeling really emotional at one point, thinking, this is so important, and there's only going to be 5,000 people who will ever read it. And this is some of the best writing I've ever done. And, Mark's work is absolutely amazing. But, the first one's now sold around 2 million copies. And
amazing.
It's just bewildering. I'm just so glad that so many people have gained some benefit from it.
What strikes me, I think, again and again with this is that there's still a lot of stigma around about mental health. It's not easy to say to a friend, even other family members sometimes, that I'm having treatment for depression or anxiety, or I have, breakdowns, or I've had a breakdown, or I'm on antidepressants. And yet now, not just because of our work, but I think it has contributed a little bit to this, is that you can go to anywhere at any party or whatever, and if you say I'm doing mindfulness, there's going to be somebody else there who says, oh, me too. And you don't need to know whether you've been to mindfulness because you've been clinically depressed all your life, or because you've had psychotic breakdowns, because there is some evidence on mindfulness there, or because you've got lots of anxiety, or because you're in chronic pain. You just say, I'm going on a mindfulness course, or I've been on a mindfulness course, and there's somebody there who says, oh, me too. How did you find it? So that stigma, mindfulness is a serious mental health approach to mental health, and we know that it works and it's out there now, but it has no stigma at all. And that, for me, is one of the most important things. And if this book has contributed to that, then I think I feel really blessed to have been part of this project.
Well, anything I didn't ask you, I don't want to interrupt anyone. But there's so much to talk about. Anything I didn't ask you that you want to make sure you mention before we hang up?
I don't believe so, though I did think about what did I think 10 seconds before.
Oh, yes, you didn't answer that question.
Well,
what did you think?
Well, the only thing that 10 seconds before I teach class, 10 seconds before I teach a mindfulness class, I find myself consciously letting go of my assumptions about what I'll meet or about who's in the room. So that helps if there's somebody there who looks very angry or somebody looks very upset or somebody looks very smiley, not make any assumptions about what's going on with them or any sense of, oh, that's going to be difficult, this is going to be easy or whatever. And that letting go of assumptions, I find one of the most helpful things I can do just before I meet a new class. And that's been helpful for me over the years.
Danny?
10 seconds. Well, in the spirit of complete and utter honesty, I am always slightly terrified because you just do not know what is going to happen, what you're going to be asked. And because, I don't know, I always feel everybody on the planet, apart from people with serious personality disorders, suffers from imposter syndrome.
Right.
They all feel as if, they'll leave the room, even prime ministers, presidents, whatever, they will leave the room and think, phew, I got away with it. I pulled it off. And actually, the only people you need to worry about are the ones who don't feel that. And I've got it in spades.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both for your wonderful work. I will have a link to the book in the podcast, Deeper Mindfulness, The New Way to Rediscover Calm in a Chaotic World. Mark Williams and Danny Penman, thank you so much for sharing your work.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this interview. Thank you.